So we're going to now move on to Sola. She's from China. She's a feminist. She's going to tell us about the situation with gender identity in China, what made her realize transgenderism was a problem, etc.
First, let me introduce to you about the traditional gender roles in China. With a history of more than 5,000 years, China is one of the oldest civilizations in the world. Although matriarchy once existed when women enjoyed higher social status, Chinese history has seemingly obliterated the contributions made by females in ancient society. Since the monarchy was established in China, Confucianism had been adopted by emperors to control people's minds. It is a religion enforces gender roles. Different from other societies, besides motherhood and managing the household, women's roles in China was restricted by kinship relations, meaning women's whole life was controlled by men. By contrast, men were the heads of the family and enjoy much higher social status than women and children. The Confucian ideology still influence people today because Chinese government meets such moral standards, especially the principles related to obedience to control its people. I'm not sure whether there was gender identity in ancient China, but there were castrated males who acted as important ministers in the palace. Next, we show you the picture. They didn't identify themselves as women because their biological sex still guaranteed them great superiority over females. Men only call themselves females when they can take great advantage from it. For example, there's a character called Dan, played by men cross-dressing as women in the Beijing opera. Yeah, this is the picture of Dan played by males. This is because men traditionally play women's roles because women were not allowed to perform in front of the public and were limited to private and segregated space. I think this is what trans people are doing. They act as women and invade women's space. No matter how well they act, they're just acting. They're just playing the roles. Compared with the males initiated in being castrated or acting as women characters, female infants were forced to dress up as males. They were made to cross-dress by their parents from a very young age, because in the past there was no transition surgery, but I think it's the same. Having the children live a transgender life completely go against the kids' personal wills. Nowadays, transgenders are not admitted in China unless they do surgeries over the age of 20 and apply for a new ID card and residence registration. With the popularization of liberal ideology among young people, LGBT communities in China continue to expand, and the number of people who identify themselves as non-binary keeps growing. Following the gender identity debate in the West, a large number of transgenders pop up and become active. It seems like we'll show you the pictures of these transgender males. It seems like they just want to take this opportunity to make fame and fortune. You can see from these pictures that all of these social media celebrities are trans males, and I have never seen any women bloggers who identify themselves as men. The next two pictures. Yes, these are all trans males. And I've never seen any women bloggers who identify themselves as men. So it is quite clear that these men are just using the self-claimed female identity to cheat the public. The message they send on the social media can mislead children who are confused by the concept of gender and hurt themselves. The message they send on the social media can mislead children who are confused by the concept of gender and hurt themselves. For the lesbian community, trans people are a hidden threat, since they have no official physical LGBT groups or organizations in China. Most lesbians can only communicate through dating apps or chatting apps. I heard about an episode that in a chatting group organized by a well-known lesbian blogger, some group members were being kicked out. They were being removed because they criticized a gay man who committed domestic violence to his wife. Later, it was found that one of the administrators of the group was a trans man who was apparently shielding his male compatriot by banning lesbians from the space that belongs to them. So we can see that trans men are completely different from the true females, the true lesbians. They only want to get the profit from being in a lesbian group. Unlike men who are entitled to choose to become women or even key opinion leaders on social media or celebrities, most women in China are struggling with the basic right to survive. You might have probably heard that China is allowing families to have 3 children and were surprised by the shift from strict one-child policy to the incentives on birth. These policies were equally disgusting because there is a blatant attempt of treating women as political tools and birth machines with no consideration of women's health and their rights in the family and workplace. I remember 20 years ago, when there was a strict birth control, the government will send supervisors to visit every household to find out if people overbear their children. My parents were very anxious about having a boy who will be the head of the family. But unfortunately, they bore 4 girls, my sister and me. We were lucky enough though. My parents didn't abandon us. So they have to let us hide behind the curtains to get away with fines. The supervisors didn't find us, but at the end, my mother was taken away for legation. Many women were forced to do that surgery, and most of them suffered from inflammation with the IUD in their uterine. We will now show you the picture of the IUD in women's uterine. This picture, which is only allowed, this IUD in their uterine is only allowed to be taken down a few years later. Nowadays, abortion can become difficult since the 3-child policy was enacted. In order to improve the birth rate, we don't know what the government will do. But women are already facing challenges when seeking a job. The employers are more likely to select a male candidate because the cost for hiring a woman is higher. The preference for men can be seen everywhere in this country. The most direct evidence might be the sex ratio at birth. The statistics of newborn sex ratio was not revealed in China's 7th population census, but it is estimated to reach 120 males per 100 females. As we mentioned earlier, Chinese family emphasize the kinship relations, where men are considered the only orthodox heir to the family. As we feel angry about parents who prefer boys to girls, we lament the 70 million female infants who were not allowed to be born into this world. Yeah, these are the statistics of the sex ratio at birth in China. The next one is about the sex ratio change between 1980 to 2009. Research have shown that the imbalance of sex ratio can result in the rise of crimes because males account for the majority of criminals. We have witnessed several vicious random killings and hate crimes last month. Women tend to be victims for their gender, and therefore we doubt that these were insult terrorists organized by the misogynists. But the media never display the essence of these crimes, and the criminals' sex were always hidden if males commit them. Laws are also biased when it comes to the violence committed by different sex. Recent news reported that a woman killed her husband with axes for the long-term domestic violence she suffered, and she was sentenced to life imprisonment. But the sentence for men in a similar case is much lighter. The husband who pushed his wife to the river and made her drown was sentenced to only around 3-year imprisonment. So you can see the bias in it. Laws concerning sex consent age, rape, domestic violence are biased and incomplete because the government never takes women and children's human rights seriously. It is a male-dominated government after all. And now I will introduce to you about the radical feminists in China. Radical feminists are not welcome in a socialist country where feminism is considered as cultural invasion of foreign countries. They define this as foreign ideology. However, we view women's human rights as a common value and pursuit of human society and should not be restricted by country. China's radical feminists grew from social media while insisting on fighting against the traditional filial duties that females are supposed to obey. We have absorbed the essence of Western feminist theories and movement. Affected by the feminist movement in South Korea, many Chinese feminists have also followed the practice of 6B40, a non-violent, non-cooperative way of fighting against patriarchy. We have a dozen of radical feminist groups on Douban, a discussion forum similar to Reddit, where we expose the sins of males and the patriarch society. However, the groups were removed by the platform altogether at one night in April. 6B40 became a sensitive word and some feminist accounts were suspended because the ideas of rejecting sexual relations, marriage, reproduction with men violate the government's need for more labor force. So a lot of Douban refugees moved to Spinster, where I knew about WHRC and signed for the campaign. This is meaningful because we are also concerned about women and children's development around the world. Most Chinese radical feminists are gender critical and thus blamed as TERF and cursed by liberals and queers. Trans women can never be part of women because they were not born as women and they do not share the same experience as women. I will also talk about something about LGBT groups or women's rights groups in China. Well, currently we don't have any official LGBT groups or association because homosexuality is not accepted by the state and LGBT are still considered as sexual minority. We used to have some private associations, but they have to remain low-key these years because the whole political environment is getting harsher. Although there is an official All-China Women's Federation established in 1949 when women were major labor force after the Second World War, its functions gradually weakened, and I don't think they actually did anything to protect women and children's human rights. It is official, meaning it represents the male-dominated government. In China, it is illegal for the public to express radical political opinions, demonstrate or have gathering, not to mention some campaign. Every move of the public is under close surveillance and strict censorship. So I have to share the screen without showing my face. Thank you.
Now we're going to move on to Iza Palińska. She's from Poland. She's a feminist activist, politician, and publicist, and is going to talk to us about what's happening in Poland. So Iza, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us what's going on in Poland on the issue of gender identity ideology?
I will be speaking on more broad and general terms because I believe that in Poland it is still very early in this debate. We are very early in this debate. And this is mainly due to the fact that we have a very conservative far-right government, and the ruling party's position is still quite strong. And I would say that we are nowhere near to losing this conservative government, which is unfortunately and sadly against any minorities' rights. So they are against women's rights, but other minority groups, they are like actively against their rights also. So radical feminists' position is unfortunate because when talking about being against gender ideology or queer ideology, we are put in the same sack with these conservatives. Plus, for several years now in Poland, we have had this ongoing narrative and far-right political propaganda of gender ideology, but this gender ideology meaning something different than what we are discussing now. When they were referring to gender ideology for the last 5 or 7 years, I would say, they were mostly referring to the gender critical feminist discourse that was saying that strict sex roles are something that is harmful for both women and societies. So for now, I would say it's too early for the general public to understand and get this difference. And for now, because we are not at risk of having self-gender legislation like approved in the future, in the foreseeable future. So for this reason, the discussion that is ongoing in Poland is mostly the matter of a language discussion, of inclusive language, of course, because the trend is visible and is quite strong in liberal media and on liberal social media accounts that are quite thoughtlessly supporting anything that goes contrary to the narratives pushed by the ruling party and the government. So when the government is against gender or gender ID, the liberal opposition will take it everything to support it without even knowing or fully understanding what stands behind that.
Does the liberal opposition also take the pro-women's rights position, or are they just taking the pro-trans position? Like, are they standing up for the basic, you know, women's rights?
You have probably heard about women's protests against this very strict anti-abortion law that was applied the last year, and it was called the Black Protest, and it was huge women's protest. So the movement unfortunately got hijacked by this pro-queer or pro-gender narratives, because the Women's Strike Council even prepared legislation on new abortion law that was supposed to be pro-women, that doesn't even include the word woman itself. Like, this is the same case as in Argentina. So I would say that declaratively, liberal opposition is very much pro-women's rights, but it's only on the surface. And when we go deeper, we can really see that there is not much of like really understanding what women's rights are about deeper. Plus, sadly, I have to say that most of women's organizations in Poland are not voicing their support for women in this situation. They, in the best cases, stay silent in the whole discussion regarding wars on language and wars with TERFs. So, and my idea would be that it's because they are afraid of losing their funding sources, which are probably not coming from the ruling government, but they are coming from somewhere abroad, some foundations that are pro-queer and pro-trans agenda.
How about you, Iza? Have you been a feminist all your life, and what made you realize transgenderism was a threat to women's rights?
Yes, I can call myself a feminist since I only remember, so I am a feminist for all my life. And I did not see and I did not understand at first what stands behind this whole conflict. And the moment that I understood was the moment that I learned about self-gender ID doctrine. So this self-gender ID doctrine applied into law made me understand in a blink of an eye that women as a political group and like social group cease to exist, and that we as feminists in a sexist society cannot let it happen.
Do you sort of read like the internet? Like, do you get information from all over the world, or are you other places in Poland, like good sites that you follow?
Like the mix of news that my newsfeed on social media gives me from the selected sources. However, one of the first stages on this way was signing your declaration. So thank you very much for this, for preparing this document, because it's extremely important work. And I would say that it's not even a matter of lack of the sources for people to understand the conflict. It's a sheer disbelief that something so absurd may be happening, in fact. So each time that we are trying here in Poland to discuss this issue with so-called regular citizens, we are met with like this disbelief and this distance coming from the position that it's not possible that anyone would be like saying there are no such thing as two biological sexes. I think that, well, from the practical perspective, this document is, I think it can be applicable more to the English-speaking Western world, which in many cultural stances is in different place. than we are with our political reality. So we have to select some pieces of it and then combine it into a new narrative, which happens to be we are happening to be organizing now. We are quite a few in Poland, radical feminists, like standing up for women and women's rights, not being sorry and not being ashamed of using this word. So, and some of us are in a quite difficult position because my colleagues are crowdfunding to be able to sue their haters and sue people who were responsible for, in one case, for losing income sources from Instagram influencer who became a women's rights activist. In the other case, the case of Sola, she was expelled from left-wing political party, not even for stating very controversial or women supportive words, but she was expelled. Even it was put this way in this document, that she was expelled for liking and sharing incorrect, radical feminist content on social media. So it's quite absurd what we are experiencing now, but we are people are terrified to come up with their voices, to come up with their opinions, to take part in this discussion, because they are seeing what happens to these other women. So at the moment, what we are doing, we are trying to get this perspective of having our voices heard and showing them that we cannot be terrorized into silence. So for that,
I mean, Iza, a thing that we've found in the UK, and I think other countries, but certainly in the UK where I am, is that we've had some very good success with crowdfunders when there's been a case, and when we have a good issue. Often it's law cases. And so Maya Forstater, who just sort of won a recent case about it being legal or it being allowed to not believe in gender identity ideology, it's allowed. She raised over £100,000 for defending her court case, and there have been a series of court cases where people have given money, and we get the feeling that there's quite a lot of people who have money, but they're scared to speak, but they will give money if they can. And it's been a surprise sometimes that we are being supported. Mm-hmm. So I definitely recommend giving it a try if you can, because you might it's actually helped the process of our resistance, the crowdfunding, because it's allowed people to support us who can't speak. So it's a sort of anonymous method of support. So it'd be interesting to see what happens when you start doing crowdfunding, if more supporters come out to help you. It would be great.
Well, we actually did start it already, so it's already happening, and we have something like fifth part needed already gathered. However, as I mentioned, your position is slightly different, because we are presenting this topic to the Polish-speaking audience, and this Polish-speaking audience who is into the topic and familiar with it, it's a margin of a public in general. So there are not so many people involved, eager to support the case, but I would say that each day more, because the discussion and the style of this discussion that is happening online is very harsh, very aggressive. Anyone can see that women are being attacked. So people are each day more eager to support us, I would say. As we speak, I definitely understand the need to build a solidarity among us worldwide, but also I came to the conclusion that it's very, very important to build a solidarity and trust between different generations of women. And what we are lacking, especially in Poland right now, that the most popular mainstream feminists, so-called inclusive feminists, well, they are stealing young women for us. Like, we cannot get their attention enough, and we cannot get them on our side for some reason still. But I think that working on building this trust between ourselves and young women is essential.